I'll stand behind you so I can see.
I'm sure Paul felt the same way, right? Yeah. God, those rods. Anyway, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good.
Good. Just for the record, there are tour guides and historians and regular folks that will argue where the site is that Yeshua transfigured. I say to the tour guides and historians, do you know everything? What's the answer?
No.
Were you there?
No.
So why spend time on issues? You just, you know, this is a side note, but you just have so much energy. Why will you take up useless arguments and genealogies and fight over things that don't matter? Even, to be perfectly frank with you, even when I watch Christians talk politics and they're arguing and arguing with each other, what are they accomplishing?
Nothing.
Think about it. What are you accomplishing when you sit with other believers and you talk about politics? I mean, it's good banter, but I'd rather spend my energy doing something for the kingdom.
Amen.
Just how I feel, and I watch this all the time. But anyway, whether the transfiguration, you know, did Yeshua leave Caesarea Philippi and then 6 days later go up to Mount Hermon? I don't think Mount Hermon's top is great for a meeting. Like, this is very flat and stuff, but nobody knows. But it doesn't matter. The events matter. And from the onset of the Bible, it says, "In the beginning, God." Where was He before the earth and the universe was here? Nobody knows. So from the very beginning, you're stepping out in faith. And if you can't believe that, you can't believe the rest of it. Because it starts with a giant leap into the unknown. And people try to figure out, like, if the universe is infinite, was He beyond infinite? Can infinite be beyond infinite? Where was He? And then what did press down? Look, knock yourself out, and I'm not being disrespectful. You're a big boy and a big girl, and I don't entitle you. I have no authority. You know, walk it out the way you want to walk out. But I'm just telling you, I'm so much bigger on sharing the gospel and helping the poor, the widow, and the orphan, and actually, you know, not because it says Yeshua is coming back in His Father's glory, and His recompense is with Him, which means His reward, and He is going to repay everybody or reward everybody according to what they've done. He's not going to sit down and ask, so what do you think the transfiguration was? Silly. And people spend silly time on it. So anyway, yesterday I shared with you a little bit about what happened in Kafarnaum. We were only up here a day, like I told him. We were on our way to Greece because Greece is the word. No, because oh, it's all right. You can handle it.
Yeah.
No, because, you know, I told you that we didn't want to come to Israel really, but we felt we had to. We were spiritual, but not this kind of spiritual. Everybody's spiritual. Everybody's made in God's image, so everybody has a spirit, right? Man has a spirit. We're tripartite of the spirit, the soul, and the body. But so we were spiritual people, but not connected to God through Yeshua. But yet we felt the tune that we had to come to Israel. But I was confident that it was going to be a pretty awful trip. So I put on the end of 10 days, we were here for 10 days, I put 1 week, 8 days of the Greek Isles, knowing that would be a great trip. It ended up that trip sucked, but Israel was fantastic. So we had 1 day. So when we drove up, I told Bernadette, you know, let's go to the Transfiguration Mount. I didn't know Tabor. It's not. This isn't called the Transfiguration Mount. This is Tabor. That's the official name. It's Tabor. Just like, you know, Kafarnaum is not the town of Jesus. It's Kafarnaum. So there was a lot of soldiers hitchhiking back then in 1989 because they had no real vehicles. They were a very poor country. They had nowhere to get. A lot of times they hitchhiked. And, you know, I'm a kid from the Bronx, so this guy was hitchhiking with a rifle, and I figured, you know, free bodyguard, right? Get him in the car, you know? So I had asked about 3 or 4 people in this kind of vicinity by the Galilee. I said, do you know where the Transfiguration Mount is? You know, Jewish guys. And they're like, no. And I kind of couldn't, you know, I thought it would be a big deal. Like you know what I mean? Like everybody would kind of know. Like somebody asked somebody in Georgia, you know where Atlanta is? No, you know what I mean? So when I finally I said, okay, fine, forget it. We'll just drive around. We'll spend the rest of the hour or whatever, and we'll go back to Jerusalem and pack and get to Greece. So this soldier came in the car, and he said, can you give me a ride to Tabor? And I said, yeah, sure. It's around here? He said, yeah, not far. Spoke a little broken English, mostly Hebrew. I said, sure. So we dropped him off at the base. This wasn't done like this. The roads were not paved, and no side, guardrails, and there was a nice coffee shop back in, almost 30 years ago. So we dropped him off, and when I turned, I saw the mountain, this mountain, and I started to get very anxious. And I've never been anxious in my life, so I didn't know what was going on. And I felt as though, the only way I could describe it today is I felt like somebody was on top of the mountain with a fishing rod. And it had a huge hook, and they had cast it, and it hit me in the chest. And they were reeling me up. And so I said to Bernadette, I said, now we were spiritual, transcendental meditation, Eastern philosophies, I Ching, Bhagavad Gita's, ethereal planes, Kundalini energies. I don't know if you've ever studied this, but I was very involved in cults. So it was the wrong spirit, but it's spiritual nevertheless. It's of the spiritual realm. And so I looked at Bernadette, I said, I have to go up. So we had this little Italian car, and I was driving very fast. When you're in New York, you drive fast anyway. You notice this road was a little narrow. Nothing, You got 8 million people on an island, you know what I mean? So that's the way I was raised. So I started really, driving really fast and treacherously. And I remember Bernadette, who is a tough girl, was screaming. I remember she was screaming, and she was yelling, you got to slow down, you're going to kill us. And she used a few other words, but some of you Southern belles, it won't work. So when I finally got here, we had there was a little parking, a few spaces. There was nobody here, and I parked the car, and I remember jumping out of the car and leaving the door open. Actually, I remember I didn't close the door, and I ran, and there was a plaque. I just saw this building. There was a plaque, and the plaque said, "The Basilica of the Transfiguration." And I heard a voice. Now again, look. You guys read the Bible. Has there been any legitimate man and woman of God who didn't hear God's voice? It's not weird to hear God's voice. Not even remotely weird. In fact, I'm here to tell you it's a little weird not to. So I heard a voice over there, and it said, "Come away and pray with me." And I didn't know how to pray. Just never learned. I know that's almost crazy because most of you were raised in Christian households, right? And you learned to pray by the time you were 2 years old, you were praying. I'm 30 years old and I don't know how to pray. So the only thing I did know what to do is from some of my Eastern cults. There's something called sun posture where you just stand. I used to sit in meditation, sit cross-legged for 3 hours. One time I stood in a horse stance for 6 hours. Crazy discipline, how you discipline your body to do crazy things. So I figured, well, that's all I know how to do. So I walked from there to here, and I saw this 3-tiered rock right here. And so I stood on it because the sun was coming up. It was like over there, and it was shining on my head. Now, I believe I went into a trance. My eyes were shut, and I was seeing like a movie with my eyes open. Now, if you're having like grand mal seizures or something like that, you see things inside your brain. It's science. But if I'm looking here, I would see it. But if I would turn, I would see it too, because it's in my brain. But if I got my eyes closed and I see a vision, I turn and I don't see it, it's a vision. It's a trance. So how many people think a trance is of God, and how many people think a trance is wacky? How many people think it's wacky? Like if you heard somebody say they went into a trance, you think it's wacky. Okay. Then Peter was wacky and Paul was wacky. Just to let you know, I'm not trying to but a trance in the Greek is ecstasis, where we get the word in our English language, ecstasy. And this is how it's defined in the Bible. An ecstasis is a throwing of the mind out of its normal state. Such a man who by some sudden emotion is transported, as it was, out of himself, so that in this rapt condition, although he is awake, his mind is drawn from all surrounding objects and wholly fixed on things divine, that he sees nothing but the forms and images within, and thinks that he perceives with his bodily eyes and ears realities shown him by God, thrown into a state of blended fear and wonderment. This happened to Peter in Acts 10:10. It happened to Shaul in Acts 22:17. Those are two pretty good guys, right? They have pretty good track records, and they were both in a trance. And you see it, you swear it's happening. You swear it's happening more than you almost believe this is happening right now. You're there, you see it. If you turn, you don't see it. So with my eyes closed, I saw the eastern sky tear. It just teared like you would tear a veil or something, like you would tear a shirt. And out of it came a figure, a person, but all I could see was the face was a little dark-skinned. He did not look like the pictures you have of him in your church. He definitely looked like he was from Norway. He did not have blonde hair and blue eyes. And he just looked very dark. And then as he started coming, you couldn't really see his face too well because his face was shining. Like when you look at the sun, you know that glow, that outer glow? There was that sun shining kind of thing on his face. And his clothes was white as light. And so I'll just read to you what happened here. Matthew 17, I'll just read 6 verses, if you don't mind. It says, Yeshua took Kepha, Peter, Yaakov, and his brother Yochanan, James and John. Those were his, he had 12, and then he had 3, and then he had a special one. There are different degrees of rewards in heaven. I know that people think, well, we'll all be the same in heaven, but that's not biblical. It's a nice thought, it's taught, but it's not biblical, because when they asked Yeshua who will be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, if everybody was the same, his answer would have been, why do you ask such a question? Instead, he would say, you who are the most humble, he said, will be the greatest. Yeah, there's different degrees of rewards. There's different degrees of punishments. It's what the Bible says. And he led them up a mountain privately, so just the 3 of them, the others stayed. As they watched, he began to change form. His face shone like the sun, his clothing became white as light. Then they looked and saw Moses and Elijah. Just think of that, speaking with him. Obviously, Moses represents the law, Elijah represents the prophets, and the law and the prophets are pointing to him as Messiah, which it does. You got to realize there was no New Testament when the apostles were around. It took a long time to get it written. And in Luke 24, what did he use to prove his messiahship? The law and the prophets. If you can't use the law and the prophets to show that he's Messiah, you'll never win a Jew. Kepha said to Yeshua, it's good that we're here, Lord. I'll put up 3 shelters if you want. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my son, whom I love, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him! Exclamation point. When they heard this, they were frightened, and they fell down on the ground. Yeshua said, don't be afraid. So they opened their eyes, and it was gone. The vision was gone. They saw a vision too, right? I mean, unless Moses and Elijah came back from the dead, but I don't think so. I think they saw a vision because he said they opened their eyes, looked up, and then Yeshua was there by himself and not transfigured, if you will. So the bottom line is they just in Caesarea Philippi, Matthew 16, that was the first time anybody realized he's the Messiah. Now he had to show, listen, I am going to die. He said, don't tell anybody. After the vision, he said, don't tell anybody what you saw until I'm dead and I resurrect. Don't tell anybody. But it was very important for him to let them know, especially the 3, that I'm gonna go out as the suffering servant, but I'm gonna come back as the conquering king. And they had to see that right away, but it was too much to handle. So when I saw the vision, it kept pressing, and then finally the person in the vision and with the glow pressed himself right up against my chest. I mean, it was chest to chest. I could feel him on my chest. And for whatever reason, I never felt like that. Now, I'm not trying to glorify the enemy, and I'm not trying to glorify myself, because obviously we're overdosing on vitamin I in this world. You know, it's iPhone and MySpace and YouTube, and it's just too much. But with that being said, I just want you to know that I had, you know, I was a poor schnook from the Bronx. We had no money. We were in a low-income housing project. You got to be low income to be in the project. And so if you made any little bit of money, you felt good about yourself. It's not that you were a big shot. You just, that's how you, so I was making money, and that was what my father wanted. You know, make something of yourself, kid. Make something of yourself. So when I was making a lot of money, for me, even when I was 25, you know, making 150, 200 grand a year, that's like 600 or 700 grand today. For a kid from the Bronx, it's big money. You know, and then I started to rub elbows with some people, and before you know it, you know, I'm at parties like Donald Trump, your president, had a party that I went to at Trump Tower, and Tina Turner came out and sang. Now again, I'm just trying to say I experienced everything the world had to experience. You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying. All the good that the world had, I had experienced. But at that moment, I had never felt all the great experiences and all the fun and all my memoirs. It was like a grain of sand compared to the beach of ecstasy I was feeling. You know, people take ecstasy, right? Yeah, and I didn't take that because it wasn't around. I took a lot of other stuff like that. But I never felt like I felt at that moment. So I remember grabbing on to it really tight. I was holding on to him. And he mentioned a few things to me. Basically, using the law and the prophets, he said, the first thing he said, and he said a lot of other things that I don't want to discuss, but he basically said, I'm the one you're reading about in the Old Testament. Like it's me. So he used the law and the prophets, Moses and Elijah, to point him to me. I didn't want to let go, but after he said a couple other things, he told me to let him go, that he had to go. And I said, I don't want to. So he said, let me go. So I opened my arms and let him go. And he ascended back up. And started to open up my eyes. The vision was gone. And I started to cry. But looking back, it wasn't a happy cry. I didn't really feel happy per se. And it wasn't a sad. I didn't feel sad, I didn't feel happy. And those are the two emotions I knew. I only knew sad and happy, you know, so I didn't understand the emotion. But looking back, you know, now I could tell you what it was. You know, I found out it's not, you know, maybe a year afterward, but it was a sanctifying cry, which I do. This morning, I cried for an hour on my terrace, praying and crying. It was a sanctifying cry. That's what I do a lot of personally. Cleansing, it's cleansing. I tell my kids when they cry, it's like, you know, spiritual windshield washer fluid. Helps you see God clearer. So it was a sanctifying cry. It's almost like all the crap that I had put in my temple over all the years was being cleansed. Still is, but there was a major cleansing that went on right then and that point. Bernadette heard me crying. I was weeping. There was nobody here. She came in and said, what's going on? And I said, I don't know, Bernadette. She goes, what happened? I said, you ain't going to believe it. And I told her, and she said, okay, because she wasn't connected really. And she said, okay, well, what do you want to do now? It took me 20 minutes to recover. I said, I want to stay here. And she said, what do you mean? You stay a little longer? I said, no. And so you almost think, that's wacky, right? I mean, I don't blame you for thinking it, but it's as wacky as James and John and Peter wanting to build tabernacles. Why were they building tabernacles? They didn't want to leave either. They thought, here it is, right? And that's all I knew, is God was here. He's on the mountain. I didn't know what you guys know. I didn't know that you can be housed with the Holy Spirit. I didn't know that you're the body of Messiah. I didn't know the way you go, God goes. I thought he was here on the mountain. I don't know nothing. You gotta, you guys were raised with all this stuff. You've heard it a million times. You've heard 50,000 sermons. But just picture, you don't know nothing. And so I didn't want to leave. So Bernadette again used a few Bronxisms. And says, what the bleep are you bleeping talking about? We're just partying, we're getting high, we're getting a lot of water skiing and dancing. She said, we gotta get back to Jerusalem. We gotta get rid of the car. We have to pack because in the morning, very early, we're flying to Athens. And I said, I'm not going. And then she's like, well, we might want to finish the honeymoon. That might be the last time we see each other. And you got to get back to New York, and you got a company to run in the city. And I'm telling you, I wasn't wacky, but I was whacked out. You know what I mean? It was like I was on some massive drug, and I didn't want the high to stop. So I said, give me a few minutes, I'll meet you at the car. And I walked back up here and I said, I'm so sorry. I don't want to go. But it looks like I got to. And I said, I promise I'll come back again. I thought it was so cool what he did that I just said, I don't know when. I'm not going to come back next week, but I'll come back. I'll get back here and we'll get together again. I was so sad. I went from like this highest high to the lowest low leaving here, But I want you to understand something that Herzl probably knows, and Leor knows, and Rusty knows. When a Jew, a Jewish person, even if they're secular, even if they're totally irreligious, they're Jewish. And you got to maintain that. You know why? Because if you don't, it's like you disrespect the 6 million. You disrespect those that died in the pogroms. You disrespect those that died in the Crusades. You disrespect those that died in Egypt. We laugh about our holidays. I don't laugh about it. You know what I say? One Purim, many Hamans. I don't find it funny. I know they say, we struggled, God came, and then we partied. I don't see it that way. I see millions and millions of Jews killed by the enemy and using people, and sometimes people of faith, to do it. Demographers, experts in population growth, there's supposed to be 300 million Jews today. There's less than 14 million. So I don't think to me, it's not a laughing matter. So if you ask a person like, so what are you? You know what they say? I'm French, I'm Spanish, I'm Greek, right? When you asked me when I was young, I said, I'm Jewish. Now, that's not the right answer, because Judaism is a religion. It's not an ethnicity or nationality, right? But to us, it is. It's more than a religion. It's bigger than a religion. It's who we are. And it's supposed to be, the word is Yehuda. It's supposed to be a praiser of God. That's what we were made to be. Jews were built to be praisers of God. Israel was founded at the crossroads of the trade routes. So every time somebody went through, they would see what a praiser of God is. The Jewish people brought monotheism to the world. We would be cutting ourselves and throwing our kids to the fire if it wasn't for the Jews. The Jews maintain the oracles of God. Romans 3, what's the big deal about being a Jew? You know what Paul says? Oh, everything. They maintain the oracles of God. You guys wouldn't have the Bible without a Jew.
That's right.
I know they don't teach you that in the cemetery. I mean the seminary, but they should. And most importantly, you wouldn't have Jesus. Because out of his own words, he says, salvation is from my people. John 4:22. So if you ask a Christian, what do you think about monotheism? What do you think about the Bible? What do you think about Jesus? What are they going to say? Pretty good things, right? So this is the only, so I explained that to you, and I'm not being arrogant. I needed you to understand a Jewish heart, because most people learn Judaism from a book. I learned it from a heart. When I left here, I just turned and I said, just one more thing. All I had was one question to God. And this is what I said. Do I have to stop being Jewish? Because I was taught as a young man, I'm from the Bronx, not from Kentucky or Tennessee or Georgia, where there's a church every corner. You know, this is the only place I know where the churches beat the nail salons. In my neighborhood, in my world, guys, there was a little Orthodox synagogue about the size of this. And there was a church that makes this look puny. A Roman Catholic church, biggest Immaculate Conception. And in my neighborhood, you were either Jewish or Catholic. That's the way it was. There was no Protestant. I didn't know from a Protestant. There was no Protestant. Catholic, Roman Catholic, Irish Catholic, or Jewish. There was no Reformed synagogue. Orthodox, intense Orthodox, or Catholic. That's all we knew. But my friends were either one or the other. One or the other. That was it. So, our guy was Moses. We had nothing against Jesus. He was not spoken of. But my understanding, a Jewish kid from the Bronx, my understanding is Jesus is the head of the Catholic Church. I know that sounds crazy, right? But you have to understand. So my thinking is, now that I met him, I now have to become Catholic if I want to stay in his good graces. Okay? So I'm willing to, although I know my father's going to be turning over in his grave. My tough dad who would have killed for me, I'm going to kill him again. But I'm willing to. That's why I asked the question. Do I have to stop being Jewish? And as God is my witness, I heard a voice. Just like I heard the same voice that said, come away and pray. And this is what the voice said. 2 words. I didn't. Yeshua said to me, I didn't. You hear? And I'm like, you know, at first I thought, what do you mean you didn't? You're the head of the Catholic Church. What do you mean you didn't? So I shelved it because going back, right, I don't know anything. I'm telling you what I know. It's hard for you to understand that because you're like, but I'm trying to explain to you what I was thinking. And any other Jew would have been thinking. So I shelved it, and we left. But when I got home, I started reading the New Testament. Listen to what I found. I made a couple of notes, just some scripture notes. Matthew 1 through 2, the first 2 verses in the New Testament. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah. I thought his last name was Christ. I literally thought that John and Mary, aka Yochanan and Miriam, their last name, it's not even funny. I'm not saying this to be funny, and I'm definitely not saying this to be disrespectful. John Christ, Mary Christ, and their son was Jesus Christ. But I see Jesus the Messiah. So right out of the gate, I see Messianic Messiah. We're waiting for the Messiah. The son of Abraham. What? That's our God. That's my God. The son of Isaac, the son of Jacob. He comes from the patriarch, the son of David. This is the most Jewish genealogy I've ever seen or heard in my life. And it's in the first 2 verses of the first book of the New Testament. Then I read in Matthew 2, 1 through 2, who was the king of the Jews? And I go, the king of the whos? I see the wise men saying, where is this Yeshua, the king of Israel, the king of the Jews? Because we saw his star in the east, which is Chochab, which Balaam saw. Chochab in Hebrew is a messianic star. It's a very specific star. Then I read in Matthew 3:1, who I thought John was a Baptist. John wasn't a Baptist. He wasn't a Methodist. He was incredibly Jewish. His parents were Zechariah from the Levitical order, and Elizabeth was from the Aaronic line, the high priest line. Devout Jewish priest. Then in Matthew 4, he gets attacked by the enemy, and what sword does he use? Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy. And then I read in Matthew 5, just for the record, this highly nationalistic Jew, in actuality a Jew's Jew, says, I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. What does fulfill mean? Most Christians think fulfill means, I did it, you don't have to. I didn't steal, but you can. Guys, I'm here to tell you, you're not going to find any of the law nailed to the cross, but you will find your sins nailed to the cross, and sin is lawlessness. So if we're saved, we should be more lawless. Should we sin more so grace can abound more? You recognize who said that?
Yeah.
What's the answer? After you ask that question, it's rhetorical, but what did he say? Heaven forbid. I say, are you out of your flipping mind? He said, I come to fulfill it. Fulfill means pleroio, which means to fully preach it. Do you remember? He didn't make it easy. He said, some of you guys, you know what? You say you never committed adultery, but your eyes are so adulterous. You commit it in your heart every day. Because there were people, and there still are today, nothing's changed. They want to hold on to God with one hand and say, I'm not going to go to hell, and hold on to the world with the other. And they want to say to the Lord, how much of the world could I maintain and still get in? As opposed to grabbing onto Yeshua like Mary Magdalene did. So I'm reading all this in Matthew, but it gets crazier, guys. I start reading in Matthew 22 when they asked him, what's the greatest law? Shouldn't he have said, it doesn't matter, I'm going to nail it. He says, the Shema, the watchword of Israel. The Shema. The thing we say 3 times a day. I'm like, what's he doing saying that's the most important thing? Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. And then he says, oh, there's another one, the V'ahavta. The golden rule of Judaism. What does he do? What Catholic guy is saying that? And then I read into Luke, and I won't belabor it, but he's having a Brit Milah. He's having a circumcision on the 8th day. I had a circumcision on the 8th day. My kids had a circumcision on the 8th day. The Torah in Luke 2:22 from Leviticus 12, his mother's going through the Jewish purification rites that every Jewish woman after they gave birth. The Pinyan Haben. Even, listen, I got one for you. This is a stretch, but it's not as big as a stretch as some people figuring out where the Mount Transfiguration is. We see Yeshua when he's born, right? In the Bible? Mm-hmm. Then we miss him for 30 years, right? But we see him one day. What day? We see him in Luke when he's how old?
12.
And where is he? Where is he?
Synagogue.
In the synagogue. And who is he sitting before?
Pharisees.
The rabbis. And what's going on? They're having a conversation, right?
Right.
Okay, you ready? Today, when a Jew has a bar mitzvah, I don't know, has anybody been to a bar mitzvah? God, you guys are so Gentile. Anyway, at a bar mitzvah today, it's major. It's bigger than a wedding for a kid because he's coming into manhood. It's a rite of passage. Now, I'll grant you, the bar mitzvahs today in Judaism, there's way more bar than mitzvah. It's just a drunk fest, pretty much. But the mitzvah is commandment. Bar is son. Simon Bar Jonah in the New Testament, he's a son of the commandment, which means at this point in time, he can't say anymore, hey, Dad, Mom, God, I don't know. No, he's been trained. He's been trained, and at this point, he has to acknowledge on that day, I am a son of the commandment. I'm responsible for obeying God. Okay? Back then, 2,000 years ago, you know what they did for a bar mitzvah? Not what they do today. When you woke up on your 12th birthday, you were a bar mitzvah. You had been trained all along, and you knew that come that day when you woke up, you didn't go to Chuck E. Cheese, you were 12, and you knew. Your parents say, you know what today is, Yeshua? Yes, Mom. Yes, Dad. I'm a bar mitzvah. You don't have a bar mitzvah. You are a bar mitzvah. You're a son of the commandment. And you would go and sit before the rabbis, and they'd say, young man, do you know what today is? So where do we see him? He's 12. Where is he? In the temple. Who is he sitting before? The rabbis. And they're discussing, and what do they say? We haven't heard answers like this out of no 12-year-old before. He's having a bar mitzvah, guys. And when I shared this, one pastor once said to me, actually in Tennessee, a pastor, he goes, Rabbi Greg, He said, actually, Rabbi Greg. But he said, he said, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had this in the Christian church where our boys by 12 years old realized they were son of the commandment? I go, I think it would be pretty good.
Yeah.
Because you raise them, not going down water slides with a shirt that says first something or other. You raise them in the ways of the Lord. And then at 12, the men come around him in the community and say, we're not going to let you do this alone. You're stepping into manhood. You're not really fully a man. We're going to keep you going. We're going to surround you. We're going to encourage you till you're ready to take on a wife and then train your son. Good system?
Yes.
It's a God system.
Yeah.
It's not a Jewish system. I'm not interested in being Jewish. I'm interested in being Godish. But guess what? Godish is Jewish. That's just, you got to do it this way, man. So I could probably make a fortune traveling to churches and telling them my salvation story, because everybody gets excited about it. But it's when I tell them this part of the other story that they go, stop. See, they want to hold me up like this, like catching a big fish, saying, for the Jew. Look at how he converted.
Yeah.
Look at how he converted. I did not convert.
That's right.
There is no conversion for a Jew. John 1:12 says, as many as received him, they became sons of God. Yeshua said. It's about receiving me. What do they got to give up? Do they got to give up the 10 Commandments? Do they got to give up the Lord's feast?
Nope.
Why? They're the Lord's feast.
That's right.
I'm going to tell you something that's going to be very controversial, and chances are you might want to spit in my face, and it's okay. But I think it's the Gentile world that needs the conversion
Yes.
Yes.
Amen.
more than the Jewish world.
Yep.
Now, do Jews need Yeshua?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But when that middle wall came down, the Jews weren't supposed to go into the world of paganism.
Right.
Yeshua would become their foundation, their cornerstone, and their capstone. He would complete their building, because without a roof, you get rained on. But they were to receive him. And when Cornelius came into the camp, he didn't start his own feasts and holidays. Jesus did not come to start a new religion. He came to finish an old one.
Amen.
And there is one God. Not 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. One God. There's one Mashiach. There's one faith. There's one way. There's one Bible. There's one baptism. And there's one believer. He's not Jewish. He's not Gentile. He's not black. He's not white. He's not old. He's not young. He's not rich. He's not poor. He's not educated. He's not non-educated. He's not northern. He ain't southern. He's a disciple. And there is only one way to be as a disciple. And that's deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow him. I don't want Jewish tradition, and I don't want Christian tradition. I want Yeshua.
Yes.
Coming back here the first time 15 years ago, I was so afraid to come up here. I was so anxious and afraid because I thought that the vision I had in '89 was just maybe something left over from some, ecstasy I took when I was 16. But I was so afraid as I was talking to the Lord, and I said, was it made up? Did I make it up in my head? But when I came back 15 years ago, I realized it wasn't made up. I realized God had a plan all along, like he does for your life. And you just have to walk out the calling that God has for you. But bottom line is we're all disciples. And there's only one way to conduct ourselves as a disciple. Please, when you talk to Jewish people, teach them how to receive Yeshua. Don't teach them how to convert
Yeah.
and drop the ways of God to take on pagan ways.
Yes.
I mean, that's what they've done to us for years. Accept Jesus. And I want to tell you a story, real quick story, and then we'll get out of here. I have a friend of mine, his great-grandfather was Jewish. He was a believer way before, 1800s, way before there was too many Jewish believers. He was a farmer. And on his deathbed, some nice, well-intentioned pastors came to him and said, we know that you eat according to the dietary laws of Leviticus, and you're under the law. On his deathbed, if you don't eat pork, you won't see Jesus. This is basically what they've been telling our people all along, guys. I'm not telling you not to eat pork, but please don't tell me to do it. You might say it's not about eating or drinking. I know that text, and it's taken very out of text, because if that's true in one of Paul's epistles, then why did Paul say all throughout the book of Acts, even at the end of his life, I've done nothing against the Torah of my people? Is he a schizophrenic, or do we not understand him? So this poor guy, through his tears, said, if this is the only way that I'll get to see Jesus, then so be it. What a horrific thing that has happened after the first century. From the year that Yeshua ascended till the year 90, it was completely Jew and Gentile, one Messiah. It was one God, one set of feasts, it was one way. And then come 90, Satan started to panic because he saw the 2-1. He saw that the Jews were starting to receive, and he knew that Yeshua said, until you say Baruch haba, until you Jewish says Baruch haba, you won't see me again. So he knew he couldn't stop the birth. He knew he couldn't stop the death. He knew he couldn't stop the resurrection. What can he stop now? The return. So every time you guys hear a Jew say Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, we're one Baruch haba b'shem Adonai closer to Yeshua coming back. So when I see Jews getting saved, look, I go to India, there's no Jews there, but we got 10,000 new converts, right? I don't care if a Jew or Gentile gets saved. I could care less, really. People that know me know that, because I go to places where there are no Jews, right? But when I hear a Jew, I don't get excited because they're a Jew. I get excited because my Messiah is coming back soon. So let's break down the middle wall of partition finally, and realize that if it's not in here, let's get rid of it. It's not in here. Jewish tradition, Christian tradition, let's get back to the ways of God. Like the prophet said, return to me, take the ancient paths. It's his way or the highway. Not my way, not your way. Not my way, not your way. Not what I learned in Jewish tradition, not what you learned in Christian tradition. Yahweh, right? His way, right? Thanks for coming. It was fun.